It's astonishing how a simple cup of coffee can unravel 5 years of perfectly curated deception. I guess I should have known that my sister-in-law's constant meddling wasn't just harmless drama. Ever feel like you're living in a melodrama that even Hollywood wouldn't believe? Because that morning, it sure felt like it. Made you a special coffee, honey. Tim cooed from the entrance of the kitchen, his voice oozing with a syrupy sweetness that didn't quite sit right with me. It was one of those all-too-happy things people say when they want you to think everything is perfect. Too perfect. How sweet, I murmured, keeping my tone light while internally, my gut was doused with cold reality. You don't just ignore instincts like these when you're married to a man like Tim. His coffee-making skills were slightly less impressive than his ability to gaslight. I mustered a smile, took the cup, but not before making a mental note of the odd scent wafting up from the brew. Years of being a stay-at-home detective, and yes, I always seemed to find myself in situations menacing enough to sharpen those skills, had my senses working overtime. From the corner of my eye, Tiffany, my sister-in-law, flicked her golden curls, breezing in with her signature air of entitlement. She had this uncanny talent for appearing as if she descended from a pedestal, sculpted solely to spite me. You know those reality TV frenemies? She was their queen. The coffee's aroma was a concoction that flirted on the edge of familiarity, but not entirely pleasant. Imagine taking a sip and having that tiny voice in your head screaming, "Danger! Danger!" So, what did I do? I made the switch. Oops, mixed them up. I chirped, handing Tim's cup to Tiffany with a flourish. I swear, if she noticed, she certainly hadn't let on. 30 minutes later, all hell broke loose in my suburban palace. Tiffany, in her perfectly manicured glory, had somehow managed to chug the suspicious blend and was suddenly more animated than a morning talk show host on too much caffeine. If I hadn't secretly been evaluating every mannerism of Tim and his sister over the years, this might have seemed like eccentricity reaching a new high, or low, depending on perspective. Now, as the situation began to sizzle around us, with distinct accusations about too much sugar and strange tingling sensations, I sipped my untouched coffee, savoring its normalcy. It was laced not with ill intentions, but the comforting realization that this day was finally leading to something revelatory. Odd? Yes. Staged? Probably. And me? Glad to have missed out on whatever nefarious special ingredient Tim had been so generous to include. Yet, this was only the prelude, the curtain rising on what promised to become the most turbulent chapter of my life. As Tiffany's escalating complaints pierced the awkward silence, my mind whirred, slotting all the cryptic messages, late-night texts, and missing receipts into some semblance of clarity. What was this all building up to? As I looked at Tiffany doubling down on her caffeinated tirade, I couldn't help but feel like I was on the verge of discovering the uncomfortable truth that's been bubbling beneath the surface, brewing if you will, for far too long. As Tiffany ramped up her unexpected performance, spiraling into soliloquies about the dizzying sensations and odd aftertastes, Tim's impeccable facade showed its first cracks. His eyes darted nervously between Tiffany and me, calculating the potential fallout like a gambler one card away from losing it all. Sweat trickled down his temple as he worked to maintain an air of casual indifference, but I wasn't fooled. Oh no, not anymore. A quick backstory for context: marrying Tim felt perfectly magical 5 years ago. We carved our dreams in little suburban blocks, with promises that felt as tangible as the lovely detached house we moved into shortly after our starry-eyed vows. But the sheen of perfection had dulled, masked by mocking whispers and Tiffany's unrelenting intrusions. I had long suspected that familial loyalty was a touch misplaced in our delightful little trio. In the midst of Tiffany's uncontainable tirade, the doorbell rang. I suppressed a grin, not just any grin, but the kind that says, "Oh, isn't this about to get interesting?" Enter my best friend, Monica, with her impeccable timing and no shortage of discernment. The eyes she cast over the scene, Tiffany's caffeine-fueled theatrics, Tim's twitchy unease, and me, the picture of calm, spoke volumes in the silent language best friends share. We hadn't discussed it, but she saw through the facade just like a detective taking in a suspect's poorly reenacted alibi. "Hope I'm not interrupting anything," she quipped, oblivious to the chaos but curious in the way only Monica could be. I gestured for her to join me at the kitchen counter, where she slid gracefully onto a stool, immediately catching the strange atmosphere. Tiffany, mid-rant, pointed at her coffee cup, claiming it was sabotaged with something sinister. Oh, the irony of it all was not lost on me. And Tim, well, he was doing everything to hide his practically vibrating nerves beneath a veneer of placidity. There's an art to deception, you see. An art Tim and Tiffany had been refining for years. Monica leaned in, her voice low enough to signal the importance of discretion. "Is everything okay? This feels off." Her concern was genuine, though I could tell she thrived on the undercurrent of drama unfolding before her. I nodded slightly, acknowledging the complexities without revealing my hand just yet. "Let's just say, today's coffee seemed more spiked with intrigue than the usual caffeine kick," I murmured, the gravity of my words striking a chord of unspoken understanding between us. As Monica glanced at Tim, uncloaking layers with her discerning eyes, I felt the empowering pulse of revelation. Today was the day all the shadows would be lit aflame, unveiling the tangled deceit they hid. Already, small pieces of a larger puzzle began dropping into place in Monica's mind as she evaluated the scenario with her razor-sharp intuition. I stood up, the echo of my chair scraping back quieting the room. Tension puckered the air, charged with curiosity, suspicion, and an unshakable feeling that any semblance of normalcy had irrevocably shattered. Tightening the emotional noose, I knew the moment had arrived to draw nearer to the brewing climax. A confrontation was due, but not before winding this tension just a few notches higher. The coffee, Tiffany's odd reply to a jarring truth, was only the beginning. The real story lay tangled in my husband's and his sister's strained expressions as they tried harder to maintain the illusion of innocence. Folding my arms, I prepared to push further into those unspoken spaces. The unraveling had begun, and there was no intention of stepping back from the precipice of realization. Every word and gesture felt meticulously choreographed as I navigated the fractured trust blooming like a storm cloud overhead. With Tiffany still caught in the throes of her coffee-induced drama, I had to act swiftly, yet carefully. Timing, as they say, is everything, and mine had to be impeccable, not just for dramatic effect, but to make sure the truth I'd feel was properly illuminated. I leaned casually against the kitchen counter, shifting my gaze between Tim and Tiffany. "So, Tim, how exactly did you make that special coffee again?" My words were coated in innocence, yet laced with underlying tension. Tim stiffened, and his attempted nonchalance crumbled. "Just a bit of this and that, you know." He waved his hand vaguely, but his fingers trembled ever so slightly. What was initially secrecy meant to be shared only between siblings was becoming a spectacle neither would soon forget. I raised an eyebrow, letting the pregnant pause force Tim and Tiffany to squirm under the scrutiny. They were concealing more than a few secrets, and the delicious irony of their web beginning to unravel wasn't lost on me. Monica, meanwhile, perched expectantly at the counter, absorbing every nuance. Her presence amplified the drama, offering both an audience and a reinforcement of justice, whether she knew it yet or not. As if on cue, Tiffany's mid-rant pivoted slightly, her expression oscillating between exasperation and something resembling incredulity. "You really switched the cups?" she asked, looking at me with slightly widened eyes, a crack in her feigned confidence. "Oh, it was an accident," I replied, with no sincerity behind my smile. She didn't seem convinced, nor was she accustomed to being outplayed. Her eyes demanded answers, a challenge brewing behind the practiced veneer. Something in her rattled demeanor confirmed my growing suspicions. This wasn't a one-time mishap, but part of a larger tapestry. "You're imagining things, Tiff," Tim interjected quickly, his voice tight as he sought to divert attention. It only served to deepen the trenches of distrust etching themselves across his face. He instinctively knew the ground was slipping from beneath him but was trapped in his own narrative, an artless attempt at reeling control back in. I felt the tug of an unsolved mystery just below the surface, an urge to dive deeper. There was more to this coffee caper, and unraveling it would require shedding the mask one thread at a time. Gazing at Monica, I knew she sensed the grandeur of the stakes at play here. Her hand brushed mine, an unspoken reassurance passing between allies. "Tell me, Tim," Monica cut in with a calm fierceness that brooked no argument. "When exactly did adding secret ingredients become your special thing?" Her sarcasm was surgical, cutting through Tim's bluster with precision. He stammered, his confidence a house of cards, crumbling spectacularly. "I just thought it might be a fun surprise." But his eyes darted to Tiffany, then back to me, betraying clearer intentions rooted in alliances and hidden vendettas than thoughtful husbandry. Tiffany, seemingly slightly recovered from her earlier frenzy, glared at me as if I were a puzzle she couldn't quite solve. Did it taste funny to you?" she asked, hesitating as if balancing trust and suspicion on a knife's edge. "Well, sometimes, things smell off even when they seem fine, right?" I replied, wrapping my response in layers of meaning, hiding one truth beneath another tantalizing fold. Her reaction indicated the game was shifting in my favor, her discomfort grew, a subtle unraveling of composure. In this domestic theater, where the actors seemed to lose sight of whose side loyalty served, there was an ominous exhilaration in prizing open the spaces where truth and deceit danced. The real art lay in gently twisting the knife without drawing blood just yet, letting them twist and turn in the snare of their making. We were voyeuristically teetering at the precipice of revelation, with no intender shifts de-escalating what promised to be the day's catastrophic crescendo. Yet there was a satisfaction in knowing I'd stared deception in the face, with more faith in confiding this truth to Monica, and indeed the rest of the world, than I'd ever need in those sworn to cherish me. The kitchen, once my sanctuary of routine, now held an electricity that could rival a courtroom drama. Every breath was heavy with anticipation, every glance a silent exchange of veiled accusations and hidden agendas. The stakes had risen with each contrived smile and stammered excuse. "Accidents happen, but not with our morning rituals," I added, watching Tim's face strain under the pressure. Coffee was our shared ritual, and in that moment, the symbolism wasn't lost on me. What had once been a gesture of love was now exposed as a tactic of manipulation. Monica, perceptive as ever, flipped through her mental Rolodex of potential scenarios, each one piquing her interest more than the last. My instincts told me now was the moment to push boundaries, and her presence lent me the courage to expose the realities I'd been gingerly unraveling. "So, Tim," she drawled, tapping her chin with a knowing smirk. "Was this your idea of a harmless prank, or did you have something a little more spicy in mind?" With perfect deliberation, she laid the bait, shifting the room's focus, allowing me a moment of undivided control. His expression flickered, the way only a man cornered between truth and deceit would react. Tiffany watched intently, as if a hidden gambit was about to unravel before her eyes, unsure whether the outcome would serve her, or betray her, ultimately. I stood straighter, seizing the shifting power. "You know," I began, my voice reinforced with certainty, "not everything's hidden behind closed doors stays there." I had unearthed more than a mere culinary anomaly, and it was time to reveal glimpses of the artful lie I'd been fed. A tense silence followed as Tim's facade crumbled further. "You're just being paranoid," he said, barely a whisper, his words a last valiant effort in quelling an imploding narrative. "Paranoid?" I echoed, feigning surprise, crafting a facade as memorable as this opening act deserved. "Paranoia doesn't just spring into existence from nowhere, dear." From the corner of my eye, Tiffany inched away from the counter with an almost fragile hesitance. Her earlier boldness was replaced, inch, by trepidation and unease. Her role, once seemingly confident, swayed as the pendulum moved, scratching at her bluster until it lay bare. Monica's gaze narrowed, honing in on subtle nuances. As she joined the verbal spar, her words were sharp and precise, like a sniper's bullet, each one puncturing the tension. "Curious thing about secrets," she mused, twisting her chair to face them directly. "They have a funny way of surfacing, especially when people least expect them." Engineered reactions unfolded with Tiffany's almost imperceptible flinch at Monica's barb. Our little drama evolved to unveil hidden motives, and her guilt began knotting her resolve into a choking chain. And then, the breakthrough, I saw paper tucked near Tim's formal jacket, a carelessly hidden piece etched with details I'd bet weren't meant for prying eyes. My heart galloped like a wild horse, racing with a building crescendo of vindication yet choosing the moment's sanctity over my need for dissonance. Now wasn't the time to grasp, but to observe. The mysteries woven through their lives deserved their intricate unraveling. The undercurrents shifted, setting the scene to test Tim's resolve further, daring him to deny the inescapable. The power Alexa into a storm, one driven by truth, fueled by revelations, and simmering with the promise of answers unwrapping their deceit inch by inch. The anticipation of this coil shall propel us into what secrets he'd hoped to encrypt forever, but now, justice, the slightest we deserve, began igniting with fervor, as if our very tether to this coiled string drew nearer its inevitable unfurling. We weren't just dabbling in games of pretension anymore, oh no, the game was poised to escalate suit, and I'd never felt more ready. This truth deserved to be known, cherished liberation embodied the heart's guideline, one I intended to embrace until no stone of this tangled web remained unturned. As the minutes ticked by, the air hummed with a tension that felt almost tangible, like a heavy veil waiting to be lifted. Each unspoken word between us carried weight, vibrating on frequencies only understood within the confines of our embattled kitchen. Even Tiffany, who wore her defenses like armor, seemed to sense the imminent exposure, her eyes darting to Tim for some semblance of a plan. But there was no plan left for them to rely on. Not anymore. I stepped toward Tim, locking eyes with him, a challenge embedded in my gaze. He knew he couldn't wit his way out of this. "What did you hope to gain from all of this, Tim?" It wasn't entirely rhetorical. I needed, to hear him say it, to ground the swirling chaos in reality. His hesitation hung in the air like a defeated flag, finally murmuring, "It wasn't supposed to be like this." His voice, barely audible, but his expression painted what words could not, realization washing over him like a storm he didn't quite anticipate. Monica fixed her gaze on him, unyielding and fierce, daring him to continue. And even Tiffany, who had found joy in my discomfort for so long, seemed paralyzed in this rare moment of vulnerability. Her own stakes were crumbling, layer by layer, before our eyes. The comedic tragedy was laid bare, and she was conflicted whether to align her shock or wield the mask of indifference she'd skillfully worn. Meanwhile, the forgotten note peeking from Tim's jacket taunted me like a siren call. "Are you going somewhere?" I asked, gesturing toward the paper with a flick of my wrist, barely able to contain my shaky adrenaline-fueled heartbeat. He fumbled for an excuse, anything to pull a shroud over fogged intentions, yet found none. "That? It's nothing," he claimed, too quickly. But I've learned that in this unworthy theater, the act of scrambling for cover only served to expose deceit further. Monica and I exchanged a look that screamed shared wisdom, an understanding only friends forged through trials and secrets could comprehend. From her stance, she caught a glimmer of truth, with the motion of a hawk diving for prey. She moved with an elegant precision, snatching the note like a plot twist that had waited too long to unfold. Her eyes scanned the content, the unrelenting calm of an attorney juxtaposing the disquiet roiling in Tim's and Tiffany's rigid forms. "Would you like to share this?" Monica asked, holding up the note for all to see, "or shall we?" Tiffany, unable to contain herself any longer, snatched it from Monica's hands. Possession, perhaps, of the unshapely future those words depicted. Her eyes darted across the lines, the transition from shock to horror swift like a sunrise turned storm. "What is it, Tiffany? An exotic new blend recipe?" The sarcasm clung to my words, the knowledge of our facade nearing its implosion palpable and singularly liberating. "It's not like that." Tiffany finally erupting in a chaotic storm, a last attempt at clinging to a narrative slipping through their fingers. Her demeanor cracked, revealing desperation stitched with fear of unconstructed reality waiting on justice's knife edge. Tim bowed his head, recognizing even sibling complicity wouldn't salvage this. The domino of deceit, nurtured by their whispers, had lost its momentum, crashing against the fortress of truth even now pulling its own shade across the stage of our forsaken lives. The vivid culmination edged nearer, seconds stretching with the elasticity of tension. This ensemble, drawn by shallow revenge and forgotten vows, would cast its final act. Any illusions once held were about to be savored as relics of a home that hadn't breathed sincerity for longer than I cared to measure. It was time to draw back the curtain completely, to let Tiffany's frantic meaning sink, and watch as the house they'd built on fragile steep layer showed its true colors, finally revealing what had lurked between coffee cups and scripted mornings. The moment had come to unmask, at long last, the full span of what belonged to whom, and why. Answers loomed on the precipice, a reality ungirded, poised, though unseen, on the cusp of victorious clarification. As the web loosened, coiling fate's tangled threads deserved the freedom only truth could offer. A reckoning loomed imminent, and my heart surged at the sheer necessity of it all. The time for half-truths and hidden agendas had ended with the unraveling power of words left unspoken for far too long. Monica and I stood united, armed with newfound clarity and unwavering determination. The storm of accusations and denials between Tim and Tiffany threatened to drown them, but the tide was inevitably shifting against their favor. "Read it, Tiffany," Monica prodded, her tone both compassionate and resolute, knowing the revelation would suffice as the catalyst for our much-needed finality. Tiffany's hand trembled, the last thread of her composure snapping as she unfolded the paper with hesitant fingers. Her eyes darted over the incriminating affair of hidden property deeds, the kind that had lined their pockets but left our marriage stranded on barren shores of deceit and betrayal. "Their deeds," she whispered, defeated. "Tim, he wanted his freedom, and I." She couldn't finish. No romantic explanations fixed the rent woven within the fibers of their conspiracy. Tim's facade faltered completely, his mask shattering under the harsh illumination of exposed duplicity. The documents not only unraveled their strategic maneuvering but offered a clear account of the monetary machinations they'd seeded for years. It appeared our home, the home built on foundations of supposed love, was meant to buoy their selfish ambitions. The room stilled, a moment of breathless recognition settled in. And I realized, in this naked exposure of hidden schemes, liberation lay not in their guilt alone, but in how effortlessly the truth set me free. Not only from past lies, but from the manifold attempts at confining trust they'd relentlessly manipulated. I inhaled deeply, steadying myself for the revelations yet to come, for the legal and emotional ramifications destined to unfold hereafter. But the initial exhale was sweeter than any retribution I'd dreamed. This was my redemption, executed not in malicious revenge, but a deft severance from damning duplicities. "You see, Tim," I began softly, but resolutely, "honesty has a unique way of shedding light, even when darkness prevails." My acknowledgement seeped with hard-earned wisdom, juxtaposing the bitterness of this moment with softened purpose. "And Tiffany, your contributions won't go unseen, legal matters have a way of preserving motives." I turned to Monica, my unbowed ally, unfurling an anchor of strength and guidance. "Shall we?" I asked, glancing at her poised, ready stance. With the grace of mutual understanding, she nodded. Monica, ever the brilliant strategist, subtly collected the scattered papers, a safeguard for future proceedings. Realization firmed our resolve, the future unbound from prior confines glinted just on the horizon, awaiting our claim to freedom's embrace. Tiffany's deflated form spoke volumes where her words could not, her bravado supplanted by impending consequences borne on truth's shoulders, the judicial actions beckoning her acknowledgement. Turning towards the door, my stride was lighter, yet firm in conviction. "After such a spectacle, I believe it's fitting to start anew," I declared over my shoulder, knowing full well I was regaining my narrative, unentangled from their burdensome lies. Monica followed, our departure unhurried yet determined, each step carried redemption and blossoming liberation, hauntingly beautiful and resilient. As we reached the threshold, I paused, glancing back one final time. A new chapter begins, my voice trailed with quiet strength, the poetic symphony of release tasting of renewal's sweet promise. With that final flourish, the stage set by Tim and Tiffany's manipulations darkened behind us, but the future waved vibrant, ushering hope's radiance on the open road ahead. My passage from the tangled past resounded with clarity, as we ventured toward the freedom entwined in justice and the unsung hope of renewed beginnings.